Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, that's good. I appreciate the light this morning. Welcome to Primetime at the BU Library. I'm Keith Brooks, part of the faculty development team. We're celebrating learning beyond the classroom through the experiences and accomplishments of our faculty, students, and staff. And that is what Primetime is all about. It's a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library, faculty development, and many other offices on campus. Keep an eye on the library webpage for more great presentations as they are scheduled. One of these presentations could be you. Contact myself if you are interested in presenting. If you missed the presentation, most are recorded and can be viewed online in our BU Digital Library, also found on the library website. Next Tuesday, February 25th, Dr. Nancy Roulet from Communication Studies will share Raise Up a Child in the Way They Should Go, applying stigma management communication theory to parents abused by their adolescents. Wow, sounds intriguing. Today, we welcome Dr. Christian Collins Winn, Dr. Kyle Roberts, Dr. Ken Reynhout, did I say that right? Reynhout, as they introduce an exciting initiative aimed at closing the gap between science and Christian faith and theology in our evangelical churches. Let's welcome them.
Thank you, Keith. Just wanted to sort of repeat. Is this on? Am I on?
You're on.
You're all right. Fair enough. Well, just want to repeat some of the things that Keith just said by welcoming you. Really excited to see you all here. Because we have sort of this window of 40 minutes, and really what this is supposed to be kind of informational, particularly for ways for faculty, staff, and others to get involved in the grant that we've received. I'm going to very quickly say a couple words to introduce my colleagues, and then I'm going to have Ken Reynhout come up and kind of walk through the vision of the grant, give an overview of the project, and ways in which faculty in particular can get involved. We put together a team to write this grant, and that includes myself, Kyle Roberts, and Ken Reynhout. Kyle is Assistant Professor of Christian Theology over at Bethel Seminary and is the lead faculty in the Christian Thought program. He works in the area of Christian engagement with culture, so theology and culture, theology and science, theology and politics. He recently published a book entitled Emerging Prophet, Kierkegaard and the Postmodern People of God. He's a graduate of Wheaton, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Trinity Divinity School, where he wrote his dissertation under Kevin Van Hooser. Ken Reynhout will be working as the project coordinator for the grant. He's also teaching on an adjunct basis right now over at the seminary. He's a graduate of Bethel College, has a Master of Science in Mathematics from the University of Michigan, an MA from Bethel Seminary, and recently completed his PhD in Theology and Science at Princeton, where he was also co-director of the Science for Ministry Institute in the School of Continuing Education, also a Templeton-funded project. He recently published this book up here, Interdisciplinary Interpretation, Paul Ricoeur and the Hermeneutics of Theology and Science. I am Christian Collins Winn. I'm a professor of historical theology here in the college, and I'm also currently serving as chair of the Biblical and Theological Studies Department. So let me have Ken come on up and maybe explain a little bit about our initiative and ways you can get involved.
My mic should also be on, hopefully. Yeah, there it goes. Well, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back. My family and I just moved back to Minnesota from New Jersey this past summer, just in time for this winter. Although New Jersey's not all that much better this winter. So it is good to be back. My father taught biology here at the college for 28 years. He retired in 2008. Those of you who did not know my dad, he's a fine person, and for those of you who did, please don't hold it against me. No, he's a great guy. Says hello to everybody. Talked to him this morning. So Christian already told you this is a grant funded by the John Templeton Foundation. We wanted to give a very quick snapshot of what we are doing and what is entailed and what opportunities there might be for people to get involved. And we're going to try to make this presentation relatively quick so that there's be plenty of time for questions and answers. Meanwhile, there is a handout that I tried to get out to everybody. If you didn't get one, there's a pile here and another pile in the desks behind Bob over there. So, anytime you want to contact any of us and ask questions, dig a little deeper, if you have ideas for other things that maybe for future initiatives, please don't hesitate to contact all of us. Okay. So we are calling this program Intersection, Science in the Church. And it is a cross-campus program. It's going to involve people from both the College of Arts and Sciences and the seminary. And actually, it is, I should say, it is a program that's meant to span all of the schools. So we're actually hoping we can get people from the graduate school and the adult education program involved as well. So it's really meant to be a collaborative effort across campuses, at least the Twin Cities campuses. It is funded by the John Templeton Foundation, and in case you aren't familiar with Templeton, I wanted to give you a bit of a background. Templeton was founded in 1987 by Sir John Templeton, who made his fortune trading on Wall Street. Had a knack for picking good stocks and good investments, and made a ton of money. If you've ever heard of the Franklin Templeton funds, that's the same Templeton. He sold off that part of the business the same time that he set up his foundation, threw most of his personal fortune into the foundation. It now has roughly $2.5 billion endowment. So it's a massive philanthropic organization. Since 1973, so even before the foundation was set up, they've been giving yearly what's called the Templeton Prize, usually for something done in the field of religion and science, but also more broadly. I think the most recent winner, for instance, was the Dalai Lama. And it's a very lucrative prize. Currently it's at $1.7 million. And it's actually written into, at least this is what I've heard from people on the inside, it's actually written into Sir John's wishes that the prize should always be greater than the Nobel Prize, so that it remains the most lucrative prize out there, which bothers people who don't like the Templeton Foundation. Nevertheless, Sir John Templeton passed away a number of years ago. It's now run by his son, John Jr., or most people call him Jack. He's a medical doctor. Interestingly, Jack Templeton considers himself an evangelical, which has, with that change of leadership, it changed the way the organization understood itself. Sir John Sr. was Presbyterian and was more eclectic in his kind of theological outlook, but Jack, being more evangelical, has made church engagement a much more priority, a bigger priority for the organization. The Templeton Foundation, since its inception, has been funding large areas of religion and science research, mostly in academic contexts. And so, but in the last 10 years, they have moved more into this area of engaging churches and people in the pews, realizing that the way that the public discourse is working itself out with the new atheist radicals on the one hand and fundamentalists on the other, they weren't really making a dent in the public consciousness. They were making lots of inroads in academia, but not in the broader culture. So they've changed their strategy. They describe themselves, this is from their website, as a philanthropic catalyst for discoveries related to the big questions of human purpose and ultimate reality. But really, where most of that money that they give goes to is into religion and science work. They actually do fund, scientists might be interested to hear this, they actually will fund scientific projects, purely scientific projects, if they feel that you are doing something that's cutting edge, but that won't get funded through normal channels. So maybe you're on the fringe of something, what you do is not very popular in the broader scientific community. If you can show Templeton that it has some merit, they might actually give you money to do that kind of thing. So they'll fund science directly, but a lot of their funds go towards funding religion and science work. So meanwhile, at Bethel, there's a history of doing theology and science. So for instance, I can say that this all sort of goes back to a core value of the institution, which has been here as long as I've been affiliated with Bethel, which is that we value the integration of faith and learning. And way back in the, I believe it was the late 80s, it might be the early 90s, but back when I was a student or just finishing, a course started at Bethel on origins, and I think that course still happens periodically here. But at the time, it was an origins course. I would have to defer to Ian to get the actual.
I think Tim Shaw is teaching it this semester.
So so it's still being taught here periodically. So that is a course that actually engages these the kinds of questions we're talking about explicitly. There's been a theology and science course over at the seminary that's been going on for at least 15 years, if not longer. That's actually the course that I'm teaching this semester over at the seminary. There's actually 2 sections of it. That's remains a very popular course over there. And then there's 2 other things that are going on, that have gone on recently or still going on right now, which I'm actually going to turn it over to Kyle Roberts because these are things that he's involved in. He'll give you a quick synopsis of what these are.
I don't have a microphone, so apparently I'm told that's on for recording purposes, so I'll try to speak loud enough. But starting on this one, the CCCU conference on the topic of origins, this was a couple of years ago, and there were several schools, CCCU schools, that sent teams or panels to present how they teach, how those schools teach origins, and what kind of methodological approach they take. So Bethel was one of the schools selected for that, and we sent a team of 4, David Clark, who was provost at the time, myself, Teresa DeGolier, and Tim Shaw. And the approach we presented was a kind of multiple perspectives approach that we felt was consistent with our quest for truth, our kind of pietist heritage of majoring up in focusing kind of unity on the essentials, but liberty on non-essentials. So we got a lot of positive feedback from the CCCU presidents and trustees and others who represented there for our approach of kind of multiple perspectives. And then the Cognitive Science and Human Origins Project, this is something that's being led by Adam Johnson and also Gary Long and Joel Fredrickson and myself around that team. It's a BioLogos funded group, and we're exploring how college students kind of intake origin views and how kind of cognitive science and theology and dialogue can help us to understand how we process psychologically origins and perspectives. And so there's much more that can be said about that. But these are a couple of things that are already going on that have been happening, are happening here in Bethel. And so I see this grant, this church engagement grant, as kind of building on the momentum of these things that are already in play. So back over to you, Ken.
Thank you.
So just a very quick, since we're talking about origin stories, let me tell you how this grant came to be, what its origin story is. About a year ago, I got a call from Kyle, who said, you know, I'm having conversations with a few people over here, including Christian Collins Winn over at the college, about possibly trying to set up a program. And at that time, I actually didn't know I was going to be moving back to the Twin Cities, but they knew that I had experience with Templeton Foundation, and they thought that they might like to tap Templeton for to do some stuff, and building on some of the successes that Kyle just described. And so we started a conversation a year ago, and so between February and April 1st, we put together what's called a funding inquiry, which is the way Templeton's funding process works. You have to submit a small package of information that says, this is what we're thinking about doing. And then you wait a couple months, and Templeton comes back to you and says whether or not they think it's worth pursuing or not. That way, Templeton culls out a lot of the stuff that they're simply not interested in, saves people a lot of time. People don't waste their time, saves Templeton a lot of time and effort. So they have this kind of initial process that you have to get through. And so we put together not a proposal per se, but just a possible project plan. And it was a very large project. Magnitudes different from the project that we actually ended up with. And perhaps later we could talk about the kinds of things that we thought we might do with that very large project. But a month later, we heard back from Templeton, and they said, this all sounds very interesting, but Bethel, we don't know Bethel. It's not an entity we've worked with. We don't really understand how things work there or where you're at personally. We know Ken, but that's not enough. We need to sort of work this out. And so we would like you to do, and they use the term, never in writing, but in sort of personal dialogue, they use this term proof of concept. We'd like you to do something smaller. Sort of show us how serious you are, show us what you can actually accomplish. And so they said, please send us a project for less than $200,000. Now, that's interesting because, again, in Sir John Templeton's will, this is a magic number. I don't know why he picked this particular number, but he decided that any project that is $200,000 or more cannot resubmit for future funding. So any project that's less than $200,000, near the end of that project's lifetime, if you want to extend the work that you're doing or expand the work that you're doing, you can set up another proposal and come back to Templeton and say, we'd like to up the ante on this project and do some more stuff. Please give us some more money. But if you've got a project that's bigger than $200,000 or more, you can't do that. You have to submit a brand new proposal and to do something from scratch. So this is a magic number. The fact that they asked us to stay under that number suggests that they were serious about the proof of concept idea, that they actually want us to possibly come back for something more substantial in the future. Or possibly do another smaller project and then keep this up indefinitely if possible. Templeton routinely funds projects in the multiple millions of dollars, so it's not unheard of for them to grant a very large program grant. BioLogos, for instance, received a lot of money from Templeton in multiple millions of dollars, which is how they fund a lot of their efforts, including the one that's going on here. A lot of the religion and science money that's out there coming from different foundations can eventually be traced back to Templeton in some way. In September, we submitted our official proposal. We decided to focus on church engagement based on our interactions with Templeton and what they were telling us, what was important to them, what they were impressed by in our proposal. Again, the way that organization had been leaning in recent years. The people that I knew through word of mouth were actually getting funded usually had this kind of church engagement piece. And again, we can talk later in the Q&A about what other pieces got left out. But this is where we decided to put our eggs. And we found out in the middle of December that we actually got funded. And so since then, we've been trying to get ready to put the program on its feet and actually get it running. There's a number of things that kind of core values, philosophy that are driving us in this process. One of which is that scientific accuracy is important. That it's important that we support and accept good science. And it's not only important to be a scientist, but it's important to be a person of faith. In addition, given our pietist heritage, given our evangelical view of the world, etc., that it's important to be faithful to our theological tradition as well. And that faithful theological reflection is also important, and that we want to hold these two things up as important and worthy of being in dialogue. Furthermore, that when these two things are in conflict, damage is done to the gospel, to the church, to people's individual lives, to their faith histories, and that there's evidence that people are actually leaving the church because of a poor interaction between the church and contemporary science. There's a number of recent sociological studies that have come out in the last even 5 years that are suggesting that this is one of the main reasons that young people are bleeding out of the evangelical church in particular. And that ultimately, there's only one truth that's possible. We could have philosophical discussions about what truth means and whether maybe there's more than one kind of truth, et cetera, but that ultimately, if our faith is true, and if what we learn from science is true, that there must be some explanation that fits it all together. Now, we may not ever have access to that, but to remain in conflict simply denies that this is what I think most of us intuit to be the case. And therefore, that we need to have some kind of dialogue. That we can't just hope it goes away, we can't remain in conflict, that we need to do this, but this has been hard for evangelicals in general. And that even those of us who are in dialogue as academics haven't done a very good job of helping lay people and people in churches and even pastors get to the resources that they need to actually be in dialogue and to feel more comfortable being in dialogue. So therefore, we have a number of goals building on some of that philosophy. One of our goals our primary goal is to influence and transform evangelical culture. Now, evangelical culture is huge. It's a global phenomenon. It's certainly a national phenomenon. It's very uneven and different and diverse. So we're focusing on the culture that Bethel has some influence over. Bethel's constituency, I think, is how we often phrase it. We want to encourage education and knowledge. We want people to actually understand what's true, dispel some of the myths, particularly about science, that are rampant in the literature. Promote open and respectful dialogue, because we think you can't beat somebody over the head with a hammer and hope that they're going to change their mind. It doesn't work that way. People will respond, not always, but generally people respond best when they feel like they're being heard and that their concerns are being aired and that they have a chance to actually work through their issues. We want to emphasize responsible hermeneutics, and this is one of my favorite words. It's in the title of my book. But essentially what we mean by that is the multiple perspectives idea that Kyle brought up, that they presented at the CCCU conference, that there is, all across the board, there are all kinds of options, opportunities for reinterpreting things so that we can somehow articulate the gospel in dialogue with the sciences. We want to create spaces for safe conversation. Many pastors who would like to be able to do this kind of thing don't have any place to go to actually have these conversations. They might have a friend that they talk to about this, but there's no place that they can resource for them to get to the information that they need. And if they were ever to bring this up in the context of a church meeting or a sermon, they might get crucified by people who radically disagree with them. So we need to create spaces for them to have those kind of conversations, and then we really want to involve the Bethel faculty as much as possible, both as experts, subject matter experts, but also experts in education, experts in facilitation, experts in getting people to enter the dialogical space in a way that transforms them. And our assumption is that as faculty members, we are by and large all committed to that and good at that at some level. Otherwise, you wouldn't be teachers. And through this program, to eventually establish Bethel as a trusted resource for people to come to who are struggling with these issues. Not that we have all the answers, because that's not the way we're setting up this program. It's more that this is a place you can go to and have this conversation. And they have people who are willing to talk with you about this and educate you about some of the options. So there are three types of events that we are sponsoring through this program. One of them are called roundtables. I've put short synopses of all three of these events in the handout that you have, so you can read that. Some of that will be repeated here, but there's going to be 4 of these events at Bethel. This program is a 2-year program. The official start date was February 1st, so we're already started. There are going to be 2 roundtables during the first year of the program, 2 roundtables during the second. The themes of the roundtables will be related to the summit conferences, which I'll describe in a moment. But these roundtables are explicitly intended to sort of get conversations started with people, get them interested in talking about these things, get them to possibly come back for these summit conferences, get them to actually bring people that they know to these conferences. The roundtables are explicitly targeted at pastors, so we'll be reaching out to pastors in Bethel's constituency. We're actually working with databases and people who have understanding of church relations to sort of handpick churches for this sort of program, but there are also then the general channels that will get the word out to the people, and people will hopefully be coming to us and asking if they can participate. The roundtables will be 2-hour luncheon events, which will be start with 1 or 2 small presentations, but then primarily be table discussions of 6 to 8 people. And each table will have a discussion facilitator, and we would like a Bethel faculty person to be that person to facilitate the discussion. This doesn't mean that you have any necessary background in the topic at hand. Maybe you're as confused as everybody else. But again, you are experts at facilitating discussions. So we want to use your skills to help us do that, and help us also then to collect some data. Like, what were the things, what kinds of concerns were the pastors bringing forth? What are the themes emerging from these conversations? Because that might help us plan some of the other events that we're doing. The second thing are summits. which are 2 large local conferences at churches. We're hoping to get 300 people to these 2-day events, and each there's going to be one per year. Each one will have a theme. The theme of the first summit, which we're hoping that will happen this coming November, will be on this question of origins, broadly understood. So both universal origins, cosmology, physics kinds of issues, and specifically the origins of life and of human life, and the question of whether evolution is a good explanation for that kind of origins. And then the second conference will be on the theme of human nature, which will get us more to things like neuroscience, cognitive science, social sciences, culture anthropology, things of that nature. We're hoping to get 300 people each. There'll be a nominal registration fee, which will hopefully keep away the people who are just coming to waste time. But it will be open to anybody who's interested, although we will target pastors and ministry leaders and try to get as many of those kinds of people into these conferences as we can. We're going to grab nationally recognized evangelical speakers. For instance, we're hoping to get, I haven't asked her yet, so don't let the cat out of the bag if you know her, but Deb Harsma, who graduated with me in 1990 from the physics, went on to get her PhD at MIT and is now the president of BioLogos. We would like to get her to come and speak at one of these. But these kinds of people who are well known in the evangelical world and who do this kind of work. And then, again, we want to bring a team of faculty with us to be on panels with the speakers to discuss these issues, to help us facilitate breakout groups. We haven't quite worked out the exact format and how to manage 300 people in one of these conferences, but we're going to need faculty to help us out. And it's going to be things that, again, that you are familiar with, whether it's sitting on a panel and speaking eloquently about some topic that you happen to know a lot about, or, again, facilitating groups and getting people in dialogue and stuff like that. Finally, there's an adult education curriculum that we'll be developing. This is a curriculum for a course to be taught at churches, an adult education course. Okay? And the idea that we have is this would be a 6-week course. So imagine 1 hour for 6 weeks. But it could, depending on the church, it could be formatted in a number of different ways. Some churches may prefer to just plan a weekend event, bring everybody to spend a Saturday and do all 6 sessions back to back. Some churches will want to spread it out. Some churches may prefer to do it on a Wednesday night because that's when they do adult ed. Whatever it is, we'll work with the churches that want to have this course. We'll spend the first year designing the course, and we'll spend the second year delivering the course. So during the first year, we're going to be tapping people to help us with this, people that show interest but also have particular expertise. So we don't just need, for instance, science and theology people. We need people who understand education and understand church education in particular, understand the difference between adult and youth education, etc. So we'll be tapping experts for that kind of work. And then the second year, we're actually going to be sending faculty out in teams of 2 to teach these courses. We'd like to have at least 5 of these courses taught at local churches. And so we're hoping to have 5 teams of 2. There might be some repeats in there, but depending on how much interest we get. But send faculty out to actually deliver these courses at these churches. So finally, this is my last slide, which is good because I wanted to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. There are lots of opportunities for faculty to be involved. No one will be forced to do this work. If you're not interested, then you're fine. If you are, then we would love to have you along. Can't guarantee that everybody will be able to participate. If there's a huge amount of demand, then we'll have to make some tough decisions. But we would like to, in principle, we would like everybody to be involved who is indeed interested. So as you heard, we're going to need facilitators to come to these roundtables and actually facilitate discussions. And to come to the roundtable event and to get a free lunch and to hear a talk and facilitate this discussion and maybe help us record some information and collect some data, you'll get $150. We set this program up to be as generous as we possibly could to the faculty who came and helped us. And so we thought this was a fairly generous stipend for 2 hours of your time that doesn't require any preparation whatsoever. Likewise, the people who come to the summits, again, these are 2-day events on a weekend probably. If you come to the summit and help us by being panelists and working in as facilitators, there'll be a $500 honorarium. These values may be adjusted slightly if the benefits rate changes, which I'm hearing it probably will next year. But they won't be huge adjustments. Likewise, we'll need people to help us develop this adult education curriculum. The compensation will vary depending on how much you help and how often you help and how deeply and how much work you're putting into it, etc. The delivery, however, if you're one of these teams that goes out and delivers this course at a church, teams of 2 people, each person, assuming that you follow through and do all the sessions, each person will get a $1,000 honorarium for doing that, and that will cover your time, but it also cover your gasoline expenses, your driving expenses. So this is intended to be all the money that you would get for that. But and then there will be possibly, depending on what you study and what your expertise is, there may be opportunities to tap Bethel faculty to actually be one of the presenters, one of the speakers at one of these events, either the roundtables or the summit conferences, depending again on who we can find and what your particular expertise is. So that is the end of my presentation, and this may be the first time I actually finished on time. But I'm actually now going to stay up here, but I'm also going to have Kyle and Christian come up so that there can be a time for questions and answers.
So the floor is open. Questions?
I'm wondering, as you develop the curriculum, if there's a deliberate cross-pollination between this project and the biologos.
Not deliberate necessarily. I wouldn't be surprised certainly in some. There's going to be some things that are relevant certainly to the curriculum, but I don't think we'd actually discussed that as an intentional part. We actually sat down to work on the curriculum. We certainly would love to draw from Adam and Gary and Joel, what they're learning from that.
It just seems to the extent that I understand what they're up to, if they're dealing with cognitive issues with how people perceive or learn, that could tie in nicely with curriculum development.
Right, because it is about how they are learning quite a bit about how students process religious beliefs and what helps ideas to stick well. And so, yeah, I think that'd be certainly worth the conversation. I was thinking more in terms of content that goes into the curriculum, but you're talking actually about
Pedagogical
strategies.
The pedagogy behind it.
Yeah.
It seems like that would complement the content.
For sure, yeah, great point.
Ken was kind of suggesting those might participate who are interested in this, but there seems to me also the aspect of bravery. This is presented very ironically in our Bethel tradition that we can all talk about these things without the fur flying too much, but I do worry about how divisive, and I'm sure you've thought about this a whole lot, that one of your goals has to be to establish the dialogue that allows people to talk without being fearful, whatever side you might be on in this. But I think for faculty, that's particularly in our relationship with students. We all know these are issues, origin issues can sometimes be quite a wall between faculty and our students. And you're aiming at pastors, but probably equally there. But I also worry about students and what this project would do regarding this wall that can destroy faculty-student relationships. Anyway, there's fear here too.
And Christian's the expert on bravery.
Of course.
So, turn it over to you, Christian. What do you think?
Boy, that was smooth. Yeah, well, I think Ken made the point that particularly the facilitation of discussion, people don't necessarily have to be experts, but they have to have some experience teaching. And I think the ethos here kind of tries to create situations where even though there is that wall, it doesn't, even though there is that wall, as you well know, we still try to engage those questions. It might be worth our while to think about a pre-meeting for some of these roundtables, just to make sure that people are sort of prepared for, and maybe we can even give some pedagogical strategies if needed. Or at the very least, I'm certain that we're going to let people know what's going to be presented in the conversation. That's sort of a matter of course. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what else to say, but yeah, you're absolutely right. There is real fear, and we're going to walk out on the ice. And you can have $150 if you'll join us.
I have a question for Ken. I know you mentioned that there was a continuity between things you've been doing in the past, and I'm a little aware of, through websites and so on, of the initiatives that you had while you were at Princeton, right? Bringing pastors and individual scientists and congregations together. This seems like an extension of that. But what were the lessons learned from that you bring here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for background, the Princeton program was in the continuing education school, and we actually brought people to the campus 4 times a year for courses, but they came as pairs from the same church. And one of them had to be a pastor or some kind of ministry leader, and the other one had to be a scientist. And so they came to learn together. Well, one of the things we learned is that every church is radically different from the next. And it was very difficult for us to meet the needs of where everybody was at. Some of them very progressive, far along, and was trying to figure out how maybe to recover some kind of historical identity with their faith tradition. Whereas another group, for instance, a Southern Baptist pair came, and they were right at the starting line. They hadn't been able to really do anything because they had to figure out all these kind of basic issues about whether or not they even thought evolution was true, and so on and so on. So it was very hard, and so we tried very, very much to promote a model where we provided people with access to resources, because there are a lot of really good resources out there, a lot of really good books that have been written over the last 5 decades by people across traditions and different understandings of theology and so on, and to let people know that no matter where you're coming from, there's probably a place for you to enter the dialogue. So a lot of what we did was just resource people. So we handed out lots of bibliographies and explained to people, well, if that's your question, then maybe you need to go to this direction, or maybe you need to go in that direction. So that some of that experience is translating into this model, and it's related to Dick's question, which is that most people come into this, if you come out of the kind of church traditions that typically feed Bethel, most people come into this with some fear and trembling. For faculty, from my own experience with my dad, I know that it's, what is my professional status going to be if I talk about this too much? Will I be put at some kind of risk for engaging in this discussion? And I completely understand that, and I understand where that comes from. Part of the reason we set up the program the way that we did is so that nobody here would be forced to play their hand if they don't want to. If you don't want to put yourself out there and say, well, this is what I really think, we're not asking you to do that. But we still would want to invite you to come and help other people be in dialogue, even if you yourself don't decide not to put yourself at risk. Right? So other than the people who might want to participate in a panel, for instance, on a particular topic, or if we ask you to actually speak in a particular venue, if you're just coming to facilitate discussion, there's no obligation to put yourself out there. And again, that's something that I learned through this other program, is that you have to allow people the space to back away if they need to, for whatever reason. You just can't force people to engage if they're not ready to do it.
Any questions?
I'm just curious about the adult ed curriculum. So you have it set up in the 6-hour sequence, and I'm just curious about what specifically you have in mind for those 6 sessions.
Yeah, not necessarily 6 hours, could be 90 minutes, but six block sessions. Have we worked through the details?
No. In fact, we intentionally didn't have we don't have a preconceived notion about what that looks like. I know a lot about this area, so there's a lot of things I could speculate about, but I really want this to be an organic process where we come up with the plan together rather than us imposing ahead of time what we think it needs to include. So we don't really have an idea yet.
I think this is where some of the data collection from the roundtables and the summits will play a significant role. Because if the key questions that pastors are asking come out there, then that's going to help us shape, the kinds of things that we want to include, but don't add.
Thematically, the origins of human nature emphasis will be present there, however it's worked out. That'll be our focus throughout the 24 months. So we'll stick with that.
And will you be taking input from specific pastors? Like if you're going to a particular church, will they have any say in the curriculum, for example?
I would not rule that out, and certainly would want to have a conversation with the pastors, obviously, so that they would feel comfortable about what we want to bring in. The curriculum, the intention is to have a fully developed curriculum so that faculty teaching it don't have to do a lot of preparation work to teach the course other than studying the curriculum itself. So, there'd be some flexibility depending on particular faculty going into a particular church. But in principle, we want to keep it fairly uniform, allowing for some freedom. Some faculty may want to tweak it, on the basis of their own expertise or how they want to focus. One thing that I don't know that we said is we intend to have the pairs be interdisciplinary pairs. So someone from the sciences, someone from Bible theology, teaching a single course together so that they can bring those complementary perspectives to bear.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah, ideally. But, so I'd say there's some room for flexibility.
And the pastoral leadership of the church in question will have full access to the content of the curriculum ahead of time. So they'll be able to review it and see if there is anything that causes concern or that they're worried about. We won't come in and drop a bomb on them that they're not expecting.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you have ideas of how you will evaluate what happens after these courses or the full program?
It's a great question. We are going to be doing a lot of data collection, mostly through surveys, to see how effective these programs are. Because one of the things that Templeton wants to see is that we've actually made a difference. And one way we can do that is through actual empirical means. So we'll be designing and delivering surveys of some sort and for every one of these activities.
It's sort of worth saying there certainly is a self-selection kind of element to this whole grant process, both in terms of faculty that want to join and participate, and in terms of pastors and churches who want to be involved. So it is a culture change grant. We are looking to transform evangelical culture, but we also don't want to surprise anybody. We're not trying to do a Trojan horse thing. So we'll be very upfront with people in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish, and want to match up with churches and pastors that are looking to kind of take that next step in this area.
Surprising people will be self-defeating because it'll just convince people, it'll just reinforce their fears. I tried to do that and look what they did to me. So we have no interest in doing it.
Well, thank you for your time. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact any of us.
Thank you very much.